Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It's a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. It's Tuesday. I finished my teaching for the week and I'm on my way home. Tuesday afternoons are always interesting because I have a 24-hour period where I teach 9 hours of classes, which ends up being quite a bit. And then so I go home, and Tuesday afternoon I try to get a little work done, but I often just decompress. And then I have my game club Tuesday night. Woohoo! So, jackpot. We are going, at our game club tonight, we are going to be announcing a new print run of t-shirts for the game club using the Game On logo. I know most of you don't go to Toggle Gaming, but if you decided you wanted to support Toggle Gaming, reach out to me, drop me an email, and we can see about ordering you a shirt as well. They're going to be $20, and yeah, I guess we'd have to see on shipping. I'd be willing to work with you on shipping as long as we don't actually lose money on the deal, because Toggle's a not-for-profit organization, so the t-shirts are going to get us a little bit of money. If we sell 20 of them, we'll pay for our meetup hosting for the year, so that's nice. Or for 6 months, I guess. Anyway, that's if for some reason one of you would like a Toggle Gaming t-shirt, reach out to me. But today I am going to do a little bit of podcast plagiarism. So there is a podcast on Board Game Geek, and I can't remember what it's called. It's something like Board Game House or something. I will put it in the show notes, so go look at that. And just by chance, when I was flipping around on Board Game Geek today, as one is wont to do, I saw a link to a new episode they had called Top 5 Games That Need to Be Made into Movies. And I'm like, that is a great subject. One, did I already do that? I don't know, and I did not check. So if you are listening your way through, you'd be like, Brendan, you did that in episode 125. Maybe I did. That's another thing I'm going to check that will be in the show notes. So you got two things in the show notes. You've got the podcast I swiped this idea from. I will link to them so that you can go listen to their much more erudite and interesting discussion of this topic, I am sure. And then I also will have a link to any other episodes I found where I talk about the stories that games tell being made into other media forms. Because I'm sure I've done this subject before, but I tried to be creative, and if nothing else, you can kind of look at it as these are the things that I would think about right now. And if I'm repeating myself, then it turns out I'm a constant being. If I'm not repeating myself, it turns out I'm changeable like the weather. So there it is. So, top 5 games that should be made into movies. I now have a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games for my top 5. Boom. The first game I want to mention before I start is going to be the honorary 6th place in the list, because this game is a game I have not played, but I love the idea of the narrative of this game, and this is Witches of the Revolution. Witches of the Revolution is a game that came out in maybe 2017, 2018, and the premise of the game is that the Salem witch trials, hunting witches in the colonial era America, was right. There were witches, but they were good witches. They were helpful to people, which is actually the plot of the upcoming Mind Clash game Septima, but there we go. So from that perspective, Witches of the Revolution, you are also one of these witches, one of these groups. Instead of being evil, you are on the side of the revolution, and you're fighting in the Revolutionary War as witches. That's a really fascinating idea and something I could get behind. Seems loosely related to the plot of the TV show Sleepy Hollow, but I'll admit I only watched a little bit of that and it got too weird, and so goodbye Sleepy Hollow. The Witches of the Revolution, though, seems like it would make a great story. So I'm going to put that as my honorary 6th entry in this list of 5. Well, okay, so the first one that I thought of, the very first idea I had about this, games that should be turned into movies, was Anachrony. Now, if you listen to this podcast at all, you know that I talk about Anachrony a lot. It's one of my favorite worker placement games. It has depth of strategy, and the story is top-notch. But I would also like to suggest one of the other games that made by Mind Clash Games, and that is Perseverance Castaway Chronicles. Now, I would say Perseverance, which hasn't had a huge impact in terms of gameplay. I enjoyed my one play of it, but I haven't gone back to it yet, so mixed bag there perhaps. But Perseverance has as interesting, if not more interesting, a story than Anachrony. You'll remember in Perseverance, a cruise ship is sailing and it accidentally drifts through some sort of interdimensional portal. On the other side of the portal, it runs aground on an island, and on that island, there are dinosaurs. That's the plot. That's the plot of the game. And then the people who are on the ship have to try to survive on this island that's full of dinosaurs. That's a delightful plot that I am happy to be engaged with and am looking forward to exploring as I play the game again. Now, as I thought about Anachrony and Perseverance, I thought, yes, these would make awesome filmed media properties. But both games, the story is far too complex and interesting to be contained in a 2-hour movie. I think in both cases, if you were to make a 2-hour movie of either of these stories, they would be boring. Or it would not work. It would feel like one of those movies where they took a story that was too big and they rushed it. Like if you watch the David Lynch Dune. It's too fast. You need more room. So from that perspective, I think either Anachrony or Perseverance should be a prestige TV show. That Anachrony, you would have plenty of room to develop the different factions and get the characters and sort of see how they are competing for control of the capital. In Perseverance, you'd have plenty of time to see people expand. From that perspective, though, I think Anachrony would have to be the one that you actually make, because Perseverance, it's pretty close to Lost once you get down to it. No, there's not dinosaurs in Lost, but there's a weird island. All right, so that is the first entry in my top 5 list, is Anachrony / Perseverance. So my fourth entry in the list, or my number 4 slot of a game that I think should be made into a movie, would be Narking. Now, Narking is the reskin of the Martin Wallace game Ankh-Morpork, which itself is an adaptation of a written literary work, or sort of the embodiment of the Terry Pratchett Discworld city Ankh-Morpork. But Narking is particularly interesting because it is an area control, struggle for control game in Victorian London, in which real figures and fictional figures intermingle and circulate together. It's not the same world as A Study in Emerald, in which there's Cthulhu monsters as well, but it's a similar idea that you have all of these different figures. You've got Charles Dickens, but you've also got Ebenezer Scrooge, you've got Karl Marx, and you've got Oliver Twist, and you've got, I don't think Captain Nemo is in it, but he could be, that sort of thing. Sherlock Holmes is in it, and Professor Moriarty, and so on. So I think that it would be a really interesting Battle for the Soul of London game, in which you have a variety of factions fighting for power in what was perhaps the most powerful city in the world at the time. You also develop, as part of that idea, the notion that all these fictional stories were actually real. I'm not really sure what the plot would be, but the struggle for control for the heart of the empire is a pretty good one. And I think Narking would make a great movie, or maybe even series of movies, or again, prestige television. So that's my number 4 slot, Narking. My number 3 slot, you could point to some media that already kind of crosses this boundary, Quantum Leap being one example, or there's I think Jake Gyllenhaal movie where Time Code, I think it is maybe, where he is on a train that's about to blow up, and every time he fails to stop it blowing up, he loops back and has to do it again. And this is Tragedy Looper. Tragedy Looper is a weird game in which you play either some investigators trying to figure out what's causing a tragedy, or you play the mastermind who is in fact trying to cause the tragedy. And you, as the investigators, you loop through a certain number of times trying to solve the question, the mystery of the tragedy. I don't know what the limit is. I don't remember how many times you can loop through or what makes you win or lose, but your goal as investigators is to stop the tragedy from happening. It's a really interesting game and has a really strong premise. I think it would make for a really interesting movie that could then spawn a series of movies if you have a group of people whose job it is to do this investigating. I think the public is aware enough of the notion of a loop story that you wouldn't have to spend a ton of energy on getting people up to speed of the idea, just whatever world building you did to have people be organized in the stopping of the tragedy. But overall, a really interesting idea and an interesting game, which could make for a really interesting film, and that's Tragedy Looper. All right, my number two game in the slot is in fact 2 different games together, but they are thematically, artistically, designerly, and publisherly connected, and that is Dungeon Lords and Dungeon Pets. In Dungeon Lords, you play a villainous leader of monsters who is trying to just live your life by digging a big dungeon full of nasty traps and monsters and some goblins that will, or imps that will get you gold and other things for you. And all of the local do-gooders come into town and cause trouble. Now in Dungeon Lords, you send your imps out into the countryside to get food, to find monsters, to do stuff. And as part of it, they are menacing the populace. And so there's this interesting back and forth in which if you are the most menacing of the local dungeon lords, then the populace gets very upset with you. And that's when you have to watch out for the extra aggressive heroes. But generally, that's the idea of Dungeon Lords. You are this monstrous entity trying to stop the people. I think it would be a really interesting story where there are a couple different Dungeon Lords, and there's maybe a new hero has come to town, or there's some new, particularly fascistic, so you have to make the Dungeon Lords anti-heroes, sort of like a, I'm picturing a children's movie along the lines of Despicable Me or Hotel Transylvania, where the monsters are generally good-hearted, they just seem monstrous, and the humans are, of course, the bad guys in this situation. They are overly aggressive or overly violent or fascist. I think fascist would be the watchword there. And so for me, that it would be the deep connection between those things that would make for really interesting story. You could then, if the imps turned popular, like the minions in Despicable Me, you could have a spin-off where the imps go and raise creatures, and then you have Dungeon Pets. Dungeon Lords, Dungeon Pets, I think would make a nice pair of films or series of films with a kind of children's theme. The lighthearted theme, the lighthearted art in the setting for those games would fit a sort of children's theme, even if the story being told is kind of dark. And then finally, what is my number one pick for the very best game to make into a movie? Obviously, Netrunner. Now, Netrunner, again, probably better as prestige television. And some people might argue, Brendan, didn't we already see that? Haven't we already seen The Matrix, which is all about hackers and stuff? No, that's not Netrunner at all. Haven't we seen Blade Runner? No, that's somebody out in the real world hunting androids, which is part of the Netrunner world, Android Netrunner. Certainly Blade Runner could be in that world, but I want to see an excellent movie that grabs some of the key runner characters and some of the key corporate villains and sets up a hackers versus corporation in the cyberpunk future world. Now again, perhaps this is better as prestige TV, something like Altered Carbon, which had a robust, developed storyline, but I think that there's tons of potential and frankly, lots of really interesting stuff that's going to happen when you tell a Netrunner story. I would also want to see the emergence of all of these characters that I love. So that is my fifth pick, or my first pick, my top pick for a game that I would like to see made into a film or prestige TV. That begs the question, which texts would you say should become movies or TV shows? Head over to BoardGameGeekGuild3269 and share your thoughts about that. You could also email me directly, Brendan@Rattleboxgames, or send me a direct message on BoardGameGeek. Wombat929 is my username there. If you'd like to play an asynchronous game, we can do that on Board Game Arena, Boîte à Jeux, or Yukata.de. Just send me a message. Wombat929 is my username there as well. Well, that's about it for me today. I'm almost home, so I want to say thank you for listening today, and I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye. All right, the second one is an entry for a game I haven't played before. So maybe this will be the addendum. This is, I'm doing it out of order. Okay, hold on. It's the magic of editing here. The first game I want to mention.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.